So I got chosen to go to Rome for the parish priest for the synod to represent Canada as one of 3 parish priests that were chosen after a number of years of really pushing the synodal vision that Pope Francis was pushing. And when I was chosen, I was told that this was a reward for my labors for all that I had done. And I couldn't argue with that because I knew that I had done a lot, and I didn't know too many others who had. And in fact, when it was announced, I started hearing from parish priests in various parts of the country who were kind of asking me why I was chosen and they were not. And it's interesting because, again, until that time, I really didn't know anyone else, any other parish priests who were getting behind it. And in fact, I'd go to clergy gatherings and I would hear a lot of resistance to it, if anything. And so what we did at St. Joe's, just to give you some perspective, I was named in 2018, and in 2019 we started doing listening at tables like this, and we did it around the joy of the gospel. This is prior to the announcement of the Synod on Synodality. But you could read it in the joy of the gospel. This is the way we were going. It wasn't hard to read the tea leaves. That synodality was sort of the vision for the church, and this is where the church was going. And so, yes, we got to do this. Eventually, the church gave us the spiritual conversation process, which we continued with. We adopted that as part of our modus operandi, our way of operating as a parish community. We used it in all sorts of ways, even in faith formation. And I'm thinking of a story, one that I always remember is when we gathered a group of parents of children who were making their first communion, as we did formation with them regularly. And we simply said to them, we gave them the process, this is a spiritual conversation process, and we simply said to them, okay, you are the first catechist of your children. What do you need? What do you need from the church? How can the church support you? And it was such a beautiful thing to watch these people who all have the same issues, right? They're all parents of young children, and they all have that same desire. They're there for that same reason. And to simply watch them talk to each other about what they do and how they really could use the church's help. And it was simply beautiful to watch that, and of course to hear their responses, which, actually they didn't actually request a whole lot actually from the church in the end, but nonetheless, very pertinent. And I use that as a good example of how the spiritual conversation process can be used in the parish. But we regularly gathered people these last 7 years and invited them to discuss. And one of the things we learned was that people like gathering and they like talking. They don't really know how to listen. There's sort of a training when it comes to spiritual conversations. There's this training that is involved, and we want to react when someone else says something, and it's just, can we sit with the silence and all of that? And we've been practicing that these last few days, but yeah, there's a learning curve there. But I want to say that the whole vision behind all of this was that the parish has an opportunity to be a home for all. And it can be that, but the parish has to be intentional about making it that. And so when we were doing listening, we were inviting marginal groups and telling people, invite your friends, invite your neighbors who don't go to church, who don't have any connection with the church, invite them to come. And there was this spirit, that there was this excitement about it, saying, oh, this initially, it kind of evolved over time. But initially there was a certain amount of excitement about that, and people felt that their voice was important. But you can also do outreach to marginal groups by using social media and social media posts that are LGBT friendly. You can celebrate certain days, like this weekend is, someone correct me, National Day for Indigenous Peoples, I think it is on Sunday. Yeah. So there are things to do, and what we did was, by simply raising the discussion around some of these issues, we gained a reputation for being a welcoming parish. And when you gain a reputation for being a welcoming parish, people who want to be welcomed, people who've experienced themselves as marginal, will make themselves part of it. And I find that very exciting, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a bit, but there's also a liturgical element to all of this, which I think needs to be explored in greater depth. And that is because Vatican II started with the liturgical reform, and a synodal reform is also going to need a liturgical reform. Lots of things to be said about that. So how? Well, that was actually supposed to be signed. Okay, so the reality is, and the beauty is, that, as Pope Francis says, the parish possesses great flexibility. The reality is that flexibility very much depends on the pastor and the community. But I would also add, the other reality check that we have to do is it also depends on the bishop and the diocese, because a parish doesn't operate in isolation. We're in communion, we have to dialogue and we have to work with. So there's always going to be challenges there. And one of the calls that we experience as a church that longs to be more synodal is this call for co-responsibility. And we talk a lot about this reality that the pastor has a lot of power. The pastor can really function alone if he so chooses to. But part of that is because at the end of the day, he's bearing the brunt of the responsibility. And how do we get to a church where that is not the case, where that is not true, that the pastor is the only one responsible and everybody's looking to the pastor to make all the decisions? I don't really have all the answers to that. And there are structural questions that I think need to be explored. We looked at many different ways, for example, to structure a parish pastoral council at St. Joseph the Worker, and never really came up with one that we found was ideal. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area. But I would encourage the laity to step up in the way that you can and be the support for your pastor if he has any desire to be synodal at all, and perhaps remind him of that duty. But in doing so, remind him that he doesn't have to bear the responsibility for everything. And there are many ways that the laity can help out. And that's all part of the synodal conversion, is us all believing that we're meant to walk together. When we gathered people, and there was an interest in the process and listening and speaking, because we were inviting them to talk about things that were edgy. And the Joy of the Gospel was a great starting point because it was an edgy document. It was exciting. When I was at the gathering in Rome, Raymond and I were there was a Australian priest who spoke about, he said, we don't have a parish pastoral council, but he said we have a parish, we decided we were going to be a parish in council. That is, we're gathering as a parish, wider community on a regular basis. And we never set up any structure like that at St. Joseph the Worker, but it resonated because it was kind of similar to what we've been doing. We had been gathering the wider parish community on a regular basis just for discussion and discernment, and then kind of figuring out where it all goes. But again, there's no, when it comes to parish pastoral councils, the Synod final document says you should have one, but there isn't really a whole lot of guidelines on what that's supposed to look like and what their juridical power actually is. So again, these are things that the church needs to develop. But I would say one of the reasons listening worked well for us is because we have a strong lay professional parish staff. And this I would advocate for to my death, and that is what the church needs, is to support the theological education and formation of the laity and recognize that role in a professional way. You can clap if you want. Someone's yeah. So Pope Francis, you know, he spoke about, you know, community dialogue before catechesis, and it was really, you can't catechize until they know that you're friends, until they have trust, until there's a sense of belonging, and we really pushed that idea. And we had to keep preaching it over and over again because we were constantly getting pushback from the diocese on a lot of the things we were doing. One of the things we did, we created an LGBT families group, which was a first step. We always saw it as a first step, and it came out of our listening, our parish listening, and it remains, simply a group of parents of LGBT persons who want to get together and talk and pray. That's all it is. And we are constantly having to explain that, not within the parish community, actually, but to those outside of it, who want to know, what is that all about, what really happens there? And we simply say, there's no program, there's no agenda, there's no ideology, it's simply people gathering together who connect on a certain level and need each other's support. I would love to see, and we often desire to go the next step and do a group like that for LGBT adults themselves. We have many in our parish community, but they haven't requested a group, and maybe that desire is not there, and maybe it's really not necessary. But I also am very well aware of the fact that I work within a diocese or a bishop, and of course that's always going to be part of the pushback that is there. So we do have to be aware of some of these things. But I think if we keep it simple and try to stress that we're about dialogue and we're about prayer, that's really what synodality is all about. We can move forward on some of these issues and always push that we are striving to be an inclusive community. One of the other ways that we do that is we have a community meal for the poor every Saturday night. There's all kinds of government grants available for this stuff. Every Saturday night, a group of volunteer parishioners prepare a meal for about 70 people, and then another 70 meals are delivered to those who are homeless. And I was inspired a number of years ago, ironically, by a Bishop Dowd from Montreal, who had a quote somewhere where he talked about how the church needs to have a positive impact on where it is. So if your neighborhood, you have to ask yourself in a parish, as a parish, would your neighborhood miss you if you were gone? Or do they simply see you as sucking off them? Right? What are you giving back? What are you giving back to? What value do you offer to your local community? And that's why I do think the outreach is extremely important for the church and for the wider community. There's a photo of the blessing of animals there. Of course, we're Franciscan, we do that. And it's not about the animals, it's about the people, it's about the adults. But I want to work towards my wrap up here with turning back to the question of liturgy and the importance of the liturgical reform how the liturgical reform gave dignity to lay ministerial roles. And there's been a bit of a pullback on this in the last 20 years, maybe more. And this is extremely important for moving the church forward. The Mass is not a one-man magic show. And yet, sometimes it is perceived that way. And I really believe if the laity have this sense that they have to be there, because if they're not there, it's not going to happen, then they're going to be there, right? The priest knows he has to be at Mass, because if he's not at Mass, the Mass isn't going to happen. But the same thing can be said for the lectors, the same thing can be said for the acolytes, the same thing can be said for communion ministers, for ushers. I mean, this is about building a relationship with the church, and everyone is needed. Everyone is needed and needs to be affirmed in the importance of their liturgical role. Women have to be on the altar. If really women are going to be respected for their baptismal charism, they have to be seen in liturgical roles. The liturgical reform, again, was the impetus that led to the other reforms of Vatican II. It was the push behind it all. And so, co-responsibility in liturgy is, for me, it's an important topic that really has not been discussed in great depth in the church. And I think it's interesting to me because in the joy of the gospel, it was the one issue Pope Francis said he didn't want to talk about. We don't want to talk about liturgy because it's too divisive. Okay. But eventually we have to if we're going to go anywhere. Co-responsibility leads to co-ownership. And I do believe that parish priests will get on board with synodality when they do see it as beneficial to them. And we just have to keep pushing this and keep reminding our parish priests that, again, it is good for them. They do not have to carry the load all by themselves, that this responsibility can be shared. I can't say that enough, because clericalism is not just something that is claimed and the fruit, the negative fruit of what priests do. Clericalism is putting priests on a pedestal so that we can knock them down. And this happens a lot in the church. The fact of the matter is we are all in this together. We are on a journey together that is our vocation. And the synodal conversion that is called for by each and every one of us is to recognize and embrace the fact that we are walking together.